you may also know that I work for the National Child Care Subsidy and Innovation and Accountability Center. So it's great to have you with us. I'm going to let Rachel introduce herself next, and then I'll introduce you to our state presenters.
Hi everyone, this
Rachel?
is Rachel Deltney. I'm with the Director of Policy and Partnerships at the National Summer Learning Association, and we are a technical assistance provider with the NCASE project. I'm glad to be here with you all today. Thanks, Jeannie.
Great, great. We apologize for the little U between Holly, before Holly and Joellen's name. That kind of just popped up miraculously this afternoon, so should be a bullet. But we have two great presenters today that are going to share information about what's going on in their state. Holly Morehouse is the director of the Vermont After School Network. Holly, would you like to say hello?
I sure would. Hi, everybody. It's great to talk with you this afternoon. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And Joellen Robbins is the quality manager at the Office of Child Care, which is the within the Department of Workforce Development in Utah. Joellen, would you like to say hello?
Yes. Excuse me. Hello. It's nice to be on this call with everyone today. Thank you. Great.
So Rachel, and actually all four of us presented this workshop at the Office of Child Care's Infant Toddler School Age Institute in Baltimore this past spring. And it was well received, but we really didn't have as much time as we had hoped to dig a little deeper into what was going on in Utah and Vermont. And so we've got an additional amount of time today, which will allow us to hear from Holly and Joellen, and also we'll have time to engage you in some virtual dialogue. So before we get started, we'd like to take a poll and find out who's joined us today. Preeti, can you launch that? Okay, so tell us which of these titles best describes who you are. So far, we've got about over 30 participants, and it looks like we've got a large variety of folks who've joined our call today. We've got lead agency staff from the Child Care Development Fund, national TA partners, folks from School Age Networks, some state, territory, and tribal staff, state education agency staff, 21C staff, child care R&R staff. This is wonderful to see such a diverse audience and participants. Great. Anybody else want to tell us? I think we're going to move on. So, as part of today's session, we plan to really help you understand the needs and benefits of forging partnerships and diversifying funding for school age. And we plan to explore ways of combining funds, and also we'll hear ideas, as we mentioned, from Joellen and from Holly on how to promote diversified funding specifically for school age care. But we also will allow time for you at the end of the presentation to share with us a little bit about your experiences. I also want to encourage you, if you've got comments or questions, to enter them in the chat box, and we'll keep our eyes on those. And we do have some Q&A time throughout the presentation. We'll begin with Rachel and I presenting a little bit of information that we gathered as part of a brief that we have written, and it is attached here in the files. It's called Combining Resources to Support Quality Out-of-School Time Programs. It was published this summer, so feel free to download that brief. And after Rachel and I share a little bit, we'll give Holly and Joellen time to talk. And as we said, we'll have Q&A in between, and then we have a chat pod at the end of the presentation. So let's get started here. Kind of to grease the wheels, we thought it would be good to get to begin thinking really about the benefits of diversified funding. Obviously, for one thing, with additional resources, a program may be able to serve more children or enhance the quality of their program. This really allows for the program to reach a broader audience who may benefit from being served within the quality out-of-school time program. It also is beneficial for programs to have a diversified funding mix to hedge against the loss or reduction of any one particular funding source. By the way, I will be using maybe school-age childcare and out-of-school time, those two terms interchangeably. We know there's a diverse programming, some that are directly or tied just to childcare, some that are affiliated with summer enrichment or after-school enrichment, but we'll be using those terms interchangeably. So as you think about funding and the benefits, feel free to share any that I have missed by posting in the chat box. And again, we'll have time at the end to talk about it. So as Rachel and I were preparing our brief, we looked for resources about the costs of providing out-of-school time care. And the most recent research we found was actually almost 10 years old. It's the 2009 Wallace Foundation study of 111 programs in 6 cities throughout the country. While it's not a nationally representative study, it really is an interesting one. The study found that the costs for care really varied greatly, and of course, nearly 10 years after the study, the costs probably are no longer accurate. But what was really interesting is that the largest percentage of funds, 39%, that support out-of-school time programs come from private funds, such as resources from foundations, employers, donations from individuals. Public resources accounted for only about 32% of the funds used by out-of-school time programs. And then in-kind resources at 19% and parent fees at 9% rounded out the categories. Another interesting finding was that most programs rely on 3 to 5 different sources of funds. So given that so many programs are using diversified funding sources, it's really important to consider how do they blend all those sources together. So we want to just take a minute and acknowledge that the method of combining funds is important. We've been using this generic term combining funds in the title of this workshop and throughout this workshop, but when you actually get down to combining the funds, you need to understand how you're going about that. And this slide visually shows the differences. Oftentimes we've heard the terms braided and blended all in one sentence. We're braiding and blending. But really there are distinctions between those methods of combining funds. When you braid funds, the funds are coordinated and costs are allocated. And in this braiding, you can see the distinction between each funding source. You know, maybe you can imagine them being colorful strands. In blending fund, you put blended funds, you put all those funds together and you lose the identity of the funds. They become almost one funding source, and costs likely are not allocated. And then another common method of combining funds really has become more prominent in the Administration for Children and Families world, where in early Head Start Child Care Partnership, funds are layered and line item costs are assigned to discrete funds, and costs may or may not be allocated, but multiple sources, usually CCDF and early Head Start funds, are layered on top of each other and pay for different resources. So it's important to, when you get down to combining funds, to understand which method you're going to use. And it's also important to know whether or not these funds are going to be combined at the program level or at the state level. Certainly for programs, it would be much easier if the funds were combined at the state level and programs simply received one funding source and didn't have to go through all of the requirements for a cost allocating those funds. But whatever method is used and at whatever level, certainly we've identified that combining funds is very beneficial. So when thinking about the costs of care, we also must think about the prices that are charged by providers and the amount of the charge that parents pay. So another thing that's interesting in looking at costs is recognizing the differences between what it may cost a child care provider to offer the care compared to what the provider charges overall, and that compared to what parents actually pay. There's an interesting study that was conducted by the Afterschool Alliance in 2014, the 2014 America After 3 p.m. Study, and they asked parents what parents were paying out of pocket for after school and summer care for school-aged children. And the average amount was $113 a week for after-school care and $250 a week for summer care. And within their study, they also found out that costs are a significant factor for parents in choosing care. In fact, 56% said it was a major factor. And of the parents surveyed for this study, 20% indicated that they received a child care subsidy. So obviously this puts pressure on programs to find other funding sources that can reduce the cost of care to parents. Rachel's going to share now a little bit more about another study conducted by Child Care Aware with regard to parents' charges. Rachel, do you want to take it away?
Great, yep, I got it, Jeannie. Thanks. And so, you know, it's important to recognize that the costs felt by parents are going to look and be calculated differently across states, especially when subsidies are in the mix. There's obviously a discrepancy between what parents pay and what the actual cost of the service is when you're the program providing the service. So this recent study from Child Care Aware shows a pretty wide range of what it costs for a program to deliver those activities for children and families. And in fact, you know, you see that there's a wide range here. And in fact, the report cautions against using or comparing a state to a national average of child care costs because the actual costs are going to vary so widely across the different states. And we'll look at why that is in just a moment. The state reporting of this information is also inconsistent. The report found that some states report actual costs to that providers charge to families. Other states report the data from their annual market rate survey. So that alone is going to account for some discrepancy. And finally, the summer data you see here is reflective only of licensed school-age child care programs, and it excludes other kinds of summer care like camps or school-based programs, which may in fact allow subsidies but can be license exempt according to state laws, which vary in terms of what types of programs need to be licensed and which kinds of programs are license exempt. So just be wary of these numbers and how they may vary from state to state. So why do those costs vary so much? We can look here about some of the perspective of providers of school-age programs, and you can see here there are many factors that affect a program's degree of quality and the services that they provide. The significant cost of staffing alone will be affected by the number and the age of the children served, the hours of programming, and the types of activities that are offered. Some of these factors will vary across geographic regions or other external conditions, such as the kind of space in which the program operates. And the Wallace Foundation study that Jeannie mentioned earlier on the cost of out-of-school time programs goes into a lot more depth about how these factors affect quality and operating costs for programs. So even though the programming or the cost data from that study is a little bit out of date, the variations here and the factors here, those things are still very much appropriate and in play. So again, here you can see, that there are factors that are proven to drive quality of programming, and those are naturally going to be big drivers of cost, especially when it comes to staffing. So staff to youth ratios and the degree of training of staff members are two of the most significant factors of both quality and cost. So how do programs, parse out this information and use it to understand and plan their costs? We're going to look at one tool for how they do that. From the study that we talked about, the Wallace Foundation developed this really great online calculator tool, and this was actually updated in 2015 to account for more recent economic conditions that have changed since the earlier study. The calculator includes questions that autofill costs based on quality indicators and other conditions such as geographic location of the program, the program's focus, whether it's academic or non-academic or a combination of those two, the ages of the participants, the numbers of slots, the hours of operation, staffing ratios, and many more factors. And so when you plug in your program's information into this calculator, it's going to prepare a report that shows what you put in and then also calculates weekly cost per slot, total program cost, annual cost. It slices and dices this data, lots of different ways that are really helpful for programs in their budgeting and planning. If any of you have experience using this tool, or if you know this tool, have used it before, if you want to put a comment in the chat box about how you used it, that would be great for others to hear. The link to this tool, it's in very tiny print on this slide. It's also in the resources slide at the end of this presentation, so you'll be able to find that link and check it out on your own. And again, as Pre-K mentioned at the beginning, the slides here are in the file box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, along with some other resources. Okay, so we're going to talk about, combining. We said we were going to talk about combining funds, so we're going to think about what are some funds available for combining. There are many programs, especially those that serve school-age children from low-income communities, and parent fees are not going to be adequate as the only source of funding for them to deliver such a wide range of academic and enrichment activities and services at a high level of quality. So what you'll see on the next 3 slides are examples of public funding sources that can be combined to support out-of-school time programming for low-income youth or youth attending Title I schools. Some of these funds flow directly to parents as subsidies, such as the child care dollars or TANF dollars. Others might flow through schools or directly to youth-serving programs, such as the 21st Century Community Learning Center program or the Federal Nutrition Program. You see a couple of those here. Some programs you might be less familiar with are provisions for low-income and other special populations that come through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also currently known as ESSA. These might be used by schools to partner with community organizations that serve these youth. AmeriCorps programs provide critical staffing and infrastructure support to many types of youth-serving programs. And then finally, there are program funds that are directed to special kinds of programming. These might be health-based or mentoring through the Juvenile Justice Reform Program, or special funding for informal types of activity centers like museums and libraries. So to summarize, there are many kinds of public as well as private and philanthropic funding streams that programs access to provide programming for low-income or other special populations of students whose families are going to be eligible for child care subsidies. And of course, this is one reason that programs have these hidden costs that aren't always visible to parents in terms of the services that they're actually receiving. The infrastructure and the capacity to access and manage the reporting requirements for different public and private funds, including subsidy payments, those are significant operating costs for many programs. And as we saw earlier with the models of combining funds, the work it takes to parse those funds out and combine and blend and braid, that's all part of the infrastructure and capacity that programs have to invest to deliver these programs to families. So we're going to take a quick poll and ask you about any experience you might have combining CCDF funds with any of the types of funding sources that we mentioned here. So if you have used any of those funds that you see in the poll here, just put a little checkbox next to any one that you've used before. And maybe in the chat box describe, how you accessed one of these funds, why it's useful, or if it was challenging, what kind of a challenge you kind of ran into trying to access these funds. Or if there's one that you would like to use but you haven't used it yet, you could make a note of that and see if anyone has any ideas. And we'll have more time to discuss this in depth earlier, but we're going to leave this up for a couple of minutes just so you can think about these funds. Let us know in the chat box, what kind of experience you have using them. I see 90% of you have combined funds with one of these, at least one of these other funding sources. So we know there's experience out there. I see 21st Century is certainly a common one, TANF, the nutrition programs. Many out-of-school time programs partner with the school lunch programs, the summer food service program, CACFP to provide after-school snacks and meals. Great. We're excited to see especially the TANF folks speaking up. I'd love to get a note of who's been using TANF. That's an issue that we want to develop some new resources on for the NCASE community on how to combine TANF funds with CCDF funds. So please make a note in the chat box if you're one of the people who said, yep, TANF was one of our funds. We'd love to be able to follow up with you for our next brief. And I see a couple people said they've not combined any funding sources. I'm wondering if that's because you haven't had the opportunity or if you've ran into a barrier trying to do that. Any thoughts that people want to put in the chat box would be great. Oh, even if you're representing this after-school network, that's fine. If you're not a child care director or administrator, please, whatever your representation is, please go ahead and put in your thoughts in the box. We've got many different types of folks here on the phone, and we know that different partners are part of that combination. We're going to talk a lot more about partnerships in a little bit. So, we'd love to hear about how you might start building those partnerships partnerships, and again, that's something we're going to talk about in a little bit, but we know that's an important part of how funds get combined is through some of these partnerships with different agencies and different programs. So even if you're not a child care administrator or a child care program, please feel free to put your experience in the box here. Okay, great. Tribal funds, yeah, certainly that's an area that we've been learning a lot more about. Would like to know more about Title I and special populations? Sure, yeah, schools are usually sort of the entry point for accessing those funds, and lots of Title I and special population funds in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. You know, that's funding that goes, for the most part, directly to schools to support low-income children. And we, you know, especially in the out-of-school time space, we see schools using those funds to partner with community-based organizations and other providers that can provide special services for kids. And so, you know, those partnerships, again, the partnership piece there is really how those funds might get combined through the school or through another kind of partnership, school community partnership. Okay, we'll leave this up for maybe another minute. Good, lots of interest in TANF. So, Jeannie, we're definitely on the right track with TANF.
Good job. I'm glad you suggested that, Rachel.
All right, great. Well, it's great to see that people do have experience with some of this funding combinations. Like I said, we'll have a little bit more time to talk about what that looks like and some people's experience with that as we get to the chat section, a deeper chat section in our presentation in a little bit. I think at this point we'll go ahead and close the poll, and we'll go on with our presentation. Please feel free to continue to put information or questions in the chat box. We do have some other opportunities for Q&A, and we will try to take note of your questions and get back to those things too. Yeah, definitely lots of questions about private partnership and foundation funding. I know that's part of the mix for a lot of programs, so I'm sure people have lots of good thoughts about that. So at this point, I want to move on to our state presenters, Joellen and Holly, who are going to share with us some ways that they've been able to combine funds at the state level to support programs for school-age youth. And again, as Jeannie said earlier, sometimes that combination happens at the program level, sometimes it happens at the state level. And so we've been really excited to learn about state level programs for combining funds, because they just open up to a lot of different kinds of programs, and they make life easier at the program level. We will have a little bit of time for Q&A after each of them presents, so feel free to continue to put questions in the chat box as we go along, as Joellen is speaking, as Holly is speaking, and we'll try to address as many of your questions as we can as we go along. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joellen Robbins from the Utah Department of Workforce Services. She's in the Office of Child Care. And Joellen, you can go ahead and take it away.
Hi there, thank you. It's nice to be with everybody today. I was asked to explain some of the ways that we've combined funding. And so we have a number of examples, but I'm going to highlight 3 here. So first, we created a grant that we did for summer youth, where we combined TANF and CCDF funds and made those available to programs, private programs, community-based organizations, a number of different groups that care for school-age kids, and provided those grants for them to be able to reduce summer learning loss and provide enrichment experiences for low-income youth during the summer months. So we have utilized TANF a fair amount to serve the teen population, because clearly you can't serve children, teenagers with CCDF dollars. But this was a really well-received grant. We had a number of programs we were able to fund with it. The second example that I have is what we call our Intergenerational Poverty Grant. So Utah has started about, the legislature commissioned a study about 7 years or so ago where they really wanted to look at intergenerational poverty and kind of seeing the patterns within families that so we could figure out a way to help families become self-sufficient. So there was a group that took in data and analyzed it and created a really nice report for our legislature. And at that time, our legislature decided that they were really going to prioritize funding in communities where there are larger concentrations of families experiencing intergenerational poverty. So the legislature, they created an opportunity to have after-school programming in those areas, and they put up $1 million of general fund that would be targeted to schools that serve a high percentage of the IGP population. And that money was given to our Utah State Board of Education, and they were responsible for administering those funds. But we are fortunate. We have a director in our that leads the Office of Child Care. She has a background. She's done a lot of work legislatively as far as working advocacy work. She has a law degree, and she's very savvy. And she was able to say, if you'll put up this money, because of course the legislature was primarily concerned about academics. So they really wanted the after-school programs that they were funding to be concentrated on academics. But if you know about high-quality programming, you know that kids don't just take their brains with them to school or to their after-school programs. They also bring all of their experiences, and the social-emotional component is huge. And oftentimes kids that are living in a little bit higher risk situations are going to need a little bit more support in this way. So what we did was we offered to use that $1 million that the legislature put up, and we said, hey, we can identify that $1 million as match because it's being used for kids K to 12. And then we'll be able to draw down CCDF funding from that identified $1 million. And then we can invest in the same programs and provide additional funding, but our funding could be used for different purposes. So, so any program that applied for and received funding through USBE then became eligible to non-competitively apply with us for additional funding. And so the funding that we provide through CCDF helps them raise the quality of their programs. They can hire a full-time site coordinator. They can use it for professional development for their staff. They can use it to lower ratios. There's a number of things that they can do with that funding. And we really emphasize what we call prevention components. So that there's that social emotional aspect, trying to help children avoid risky behaviors and that type of thing. And so we invested a large amount of the drawdown in 2 of our rural counties in Utah that have very high percentages of intergenerational poverty, families experiencing generational poverty. And so we have invested a great deal in those 2 counties, assuring that we could provide after-school programming in the schools there. And then the other group that received money from USBE, we gave supplemental funding to. So they could apply non-competitively. We figured out how many people wanted the supplemental funding, and we pretty much just divided it up amongst them. And then they submitted a budget. This is a little tricky, where they talked about braided funds, blended funds. these are, or layered funds, they do have to bill us separately. So that is one thing that's a little bit tricky for the programs if they're receiving the IGP grant. For the academic portion, they have to bill USBE, and for the enrichment piece, they bill DWS. So that is a little bit challenging for them, but we have found that it has worked very well, and we are now in our second iteration. So we funded a group for 3 years, and then it was renewed, and now we're in that second cohort group. So it's actually, we've gotten some really good data out of it as well. The other way that we combined funding, this was also with our Utah State Board of Education. One thing that we do as the lead agency is we make a very substantial investment in our Utah After-School Network. So we use a lot of CCDF funds to support our Utah After-School Network. We house out-of-school time specialists within their organization that provide support to our grantees in raising their quality. And we really were able to, through that relationship with UAN, create a stronger connection with our Utah State Board of Education. And so with their 21st Century dollars, they felt that there was a huge need for stronger PD, specifically for out-of-school time programs, which we felt that there was as well. Their funding, 21st Century, can be used for either elementary or teen programming. We also had elementary and teen program because of the TANF dollars. So what we did was kind of decide together that to really be able to provide robust TA, we needed a person that was housed at the Utah After School Network that would specifically, their specific position would be to develop PD for all after-school providers from kindergarten up through the age of 18. So all those that worked with children and youth in that age group. And so USBE put in 21st Century dollars to help fund the salary for that person. We put in CCDF and TANF funds. And so it created an entire position. And we found since we've been doing this that the PD opportunities for our providers working with kids this age has just taken off. We have a really great behavior management institute that that they put on during each year for both teen programming and elementary education programming. They fund conferences. The Jumpstart Conference is early each year and early in the school year. And then they also have what's called a Recharge Conference mid-year. And they've just really been able to meet this need out in the community. And also provide scholarships for people that are in the rural areas to travel to the more central area of the state where the conference is offered. So those are the 3 examples that I actually put on slides. I can say that I think there's definite things that have allowed us to be successful. So we have been very collaborative, and I think collaboration really is the key. From my perspective, this started years and years ago when the Utah After School Network was first created, and they got a grant from a foundation, and they put together what was called the Utah After School Think Tank. And so we had people come from all different strands of after-school care, from private providers to a number of, nonprofit, school districts, people that were providing this. And by that one event did so much to help us all be introduced to each other. So it really helped our individuals know who the key people were at the Utah State Board of Education. We really became more interested in after-school funding, and we began to provide more intensive support to Utah After School Network. And so when I think about how this all started, this really goes back many, many years, at least 15 years. So the other thing we found is it's really important that all the partners have a voice. So we do meet regularly, and we talk about our different needs as things are changing and evolving, because that always happens. We are pretty open with each other about what our needs are, and work to make sure that everybody is getting what they need for the funds that they're putting in. I already mentioned that we're pretty open and direct, and I think that you really have to be open to considering all possibilities to leverage funds most effectively. And for us, one of the things that really was kind of like a light bulb going on about 12 years ago, maybe more, we realized that TANF funds really could be utilized for teen programming. And we heard from our communities that there was a huge need for it to keep kids busy after school and engaged in positive activities. And we're fortunate because at the Department of Workforce Services, we are the lead agency in the Office of Child Care for CCDF, but the lead agency for TANF is also here. They're on a different floor, and of course they have different requirements, but we're together within the same agency. And so that really created a lot of opportunities for us to be able to collaborate with our own people to say, hey, could we access some of your money for specific purposes, and develop relationships there. And so I think those are some of the things that have helped us be successful. And I have to say that relationships are probably the thing that I enjoy the most, having the opportunity to work with a number of people and really understand their organization and what their organization prioritizes, and how they move their work forward. I think it's really been beneficial for myself and my after-school program specialists, who are really invested in this work. They're very passionate about it, and so it's just something that has really worked well for our team. And those are my slides.
Great. Thanks so much, Joellen. This is a great overview of the work that you're doing in Utah. We did have one question from Kelsey about for the IGP grant, how did you meet CCDF grant requirements?
I guess when you look at CCDF, it's pretty flexible within how you're able to utilize the funds. And so for that particular funding, for that particular grant, it's really a quality improvement. And so we're able to use it under quality improvement dollars. Is that what she means? I want to make sure I understood what she...
Yep, let's see.
That's what I assumed she meant, yeah.
Yeah.
You use quality dollars rather than the subsidy dollars, yeah.
That's right. We don't use that. We don't use subsidy for that.
All right, any other questions for Joellen? Please put those in the chat box. And Joellen, I know you said that, building these relationships has been the real key to getting this to work, and the great fun of the work that you're doing. Is there any sort of significant milestone or a step that you took to, get one of these relationships going or keep it going? What do you think sort of is the key for some of the partnerships, funding partnership relationships that you've built?
Well, when I look at how things kind of evolved in Utah, honestly, the thing I already mentioned really pulled people together, the think tank, and that was really organized by our Utah After School Network. We did have a piece of that. The After School Program Specialist did help organize that event. But I just think sometimes it's just finding ways to convene people and bring them together to really discuss very specific topics. And and so I think that we were fortunate in that we happened to have personalities that really clicked, and we're able to talk more, that we're interested in talking more. I think, too, our after-school network has done a really good job of in bringing organizations together so that they can learn from each other. Funding is always an issue. We do make a substantial CCDF dollar funding in after school, but there's just never enough money, no matter how you slice it. And so
Right.
they've created what's called regional networks, and so they encourage providers within regions to come together and facilitate conversation about a lot of different things. My program specialists are also involved in those as well. So I think really a lot of it is just about getting people together and finding common need. So like with the PD position that we fund with USBE, we have a common need for PD, and where neither of us can afford to fund an entire full-time position, we can put our money together. So finding those things that you both want. What do we both want that we can't afford to do ourselves? Yeah, really, from my perspective, it really just is about the convening and finding out who's who in the state and making sure that you're opening communication with them.
That's great. I think that's going to resonate for a lot of the folks here. And I know we're going to hear in just a moment from Holly, from her perspective at one of our state networks about building some of these partnerships and relationships and programs. But before we move on to Holly, Joellen, what advice would you have sort of from the state perspective for the state after-school networks on the call here today, and some of the other external community-based partner representatives here on the phone today about how to go about having that conversation with their state administrator?
That's kind of a hard question. It's really interesting to me because I've gone to a number of conferences now. I've gone to the infant toddler school age conference the last couple of years and talked with a lot of network leads. And I've been really surprised to find that there really are a number of states that aren't investing their CCDF dollars in after school, and that they will say, how do you guys do this? How do you actually, how does this happen? And it's hard for me to answer because we've been doing it for so long that it's just really second nature. I can say that the director of Office of Child Care at the time that UAN was created, she had been previously our after-school program specialist in this office before she was the director. And so I do think her own passion for after-school helped drive that a little bit as far as our investment. Also, there was some work done, and this was many years ago, and I don't even know which year, I just remember it happening, where the legislature was looking at child care issues and found that a lot of moms whose kids were now school age wanted to enter the workforce, but child care was an issue. And so we were actually asked by the legislature to consider how we could utilize some of our funding to support working parents in after-school programs. So there's just so many different factors that play, but that's a really hard question for me to answer. I'm not sure that I did answer it. I'm sorry if I didn't.
No, that's a great start. Sometimes it really is just about finding the right person with the right interest and, having that initial connection. So good to hear that if there's no magic bullet for making this work, and that might be hard, but I think people are probably relieved to hear that.
Well, and our after-school network does a good job of finding other funding sources too. Like they have MOT, they have, you know, they have some other means. They've had STEM funding in the past. So they find their own, you know, additional money to help them be more effective. They do a great job.
Well, I think that's a great segue to our next presenter, Holly Morehouse from the Vermont After-School Network. Holly's going to talk about the same kind of state-level partnerships and work from her perspective. And again, continue to put questions for Holly or for Joellen in the chat box, and we will have some time for Q&A as we go along. But Holly, you can go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Joellen. So as Rachel said, Vermont After School is the statewide after-school network in Vermont. We've been around since 2009 and became our own nonprofit in 2013. I think in the examples that I'll talk about, you'll hear many of the same points that Joellen hit on, but perhaps from a slightly different perspective as the statewide network and a nonprofit working with multiple state agencies to do this work. Just to give you some perspective, in Vermont and at the network, the main state agencies that we work with around after school are our Child Development Division under the Department for Children and Families, and then our Agency of Education with the 21C funds, similar to what Joellen spoke about. We do have partnership and funding relationships with multiple other agencies, as well as numerous private foundations, probably another 12 to 13 different funding sources that feed into the network. But the examples that I'm going to speak to will primarily talk about those main funding sources, but what you'll see over time is that projects that started with the state agencies have now grown and developed and brought in additional private funds as well. I would say for the CCDF funds, at this point, for every dollar from the CCDF that comes to the network, an additional $3 or $4 is generated from other funds to help support that work. So I have 3 examples as well, and I chose them to try to give some different perspective and different ways that we are combining and using the funds. The first example is really around program quality assessment. So a number of years ago, when Vermont was looking at how do we define quality in our state, at that point, licensed programs were really operating under one definition of quality, and 21C programs were operating under a different definition of quality. So one of the things that the network did at that point was to step in and say, hey, can we develop a joint definition of quality? Can we select one quality assessment tool? We worked with a group of after-school directors and providers from all across the state for over a year to look at different tools, analyze different tools, so that the choice for what Vermont selected was really coming from the field. The network wasn't weighing in on one tool over another. We were looking for a research-based tool, of course, but we wanted to come from the field, which also helped with the discussion back to the state agencies. So in some of this, like how these things happen, there was a lot of power in coming to the state agencies saying, you know, this is a group that got together, they met for a year, here's everything we looked at, here's the tool that we want to implement jointly in Vermont. And both state agencies got behind the adoption of that tool. And where we're able to braid the funding around the tool is around the training and the use of the quality assessment tool and external assessors to support programs and looking at their quality in their program, and then also investing in workshops and trainings for staff to help move the needle on their program quality improvement process. It also means that when programs come together at a state conference or on a year-long coaching strand, they have that common ground, regardless of who's funding them. They have a common ground when they're talking about program quality and what they're trying to drive towards with their staff and with the children and youth they're working with, which has had tremendous advantage that ripples out in a lot of different ways on how you can then move the field forward. I'm very clear that we do braid funding and pay attention to the different restrictions on the different funding sources. And the way that the quality assessment tool has been implemented varies. It does vary a little bit. On the licensed program side, it is part of our quality rating and improvement system, our QRIS. It's an option in there for tools that for programs that can use the tool. And then on the 21C side in Vermont, all programs that receive 21st century funding are required to use it on an annual basis. So on one end it's a requirement, on the other it's an option to use a tool, but at least we've got the same tool. And the supports and coaching that we're doing from the network can go out in the same way depending on program need. The second example is similar to the Utah example around the position they created the network, and this was really all of us coming together around a need to invest in more training and support around social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices in the field. So, you know, as we all know, finding more and more programs struggling to handle different situations, families in crisis, challenging behaviors, and how can we better equip the field to support families, children, and youth in this way. With the braided funding, we were able to create a full-time position, 32 hours a week, focused on social emotional learning. We were able to hire a certified social worker at the network to really augment our professional development and coaching team in a really crucial way. Having that position, which is something, as Joellen said, with Utah, we couldn't have done with any one funding source necessarily, really has allowed us to go deep into this area of practice and also to go out broad. So it has opened up many new partnerships with groups like Restorative Justice or Mental Health or the Trauma Work Group in Vermont that has done two things. And one, bringing after school to those tables and into those conversations. So when state policies and legislation is being discussed about trauma-informed practice or toxic stress, that after school is included in that legislation and that policy. And then in the reverse, it has helped us bring expertise and partners and connections from the other folks sitting around that table to our program providers, which has helped to strengthen their programming and their own ability to work with the children and youth in their programs. We have been able to develop a host of resources, create this partnership network just around SEL, and we have also been able to model some really interesting coaching strategies. So moving away from training and workshops and really into long-term, ongoing, in-depth coaching. Because what we have seen with this type of work in particular is that it is that ongoing development. Because as adults, we are also developing our own social emotional competencies and growth and dealing with things at the same time that we are working with children and youth and families who are also. So it is not a 2-hour workshop that's going to meet that need. It's this ongoing practice. What we have been able to do that's been kind of interesting with the different funders is sometimes one of the funders will fund a particular sort of pilot. Well, let's try this. You know, let's try establishing a community practice across 10 after-school programs where they're meeting regularly on a monthly basis, and let's bring in the Restorative Justice Partnership. And we try it in one place. We get to tweak it and see how it works, and then we go out to the other partners and braid the funding to scale it up and extend it out. So it's been a really interesting model, and you'll see some of the examples on the slide of different things that have been piloted by the different funders that eventually we land on models that work, and then those get scaled up with the joint and braided funding. And the third example I have here is really around workshops. By braiding funding around workshops, we can, as a state, identify priorities. We can be more proactive in driving where we want to see the field go and where the quality needs are. As the network, we were able to recruit and support trainers across a broad swath of topic areas and content areas. We work with the state agencies on when new workshops or curriculums are needed. We can bring in partners through that. We do have common evaluation and outcome measures, and a database we were able to track, regardless of what type of program it is, what programs are participated in, what types of trainings, when, how much, dosage, and what the evaluation outcomes, and then the outcomes for the program themselves, so the changes in program practice, so that we can have a look statewide at where programs are, what they're utilizing, and what else is needed. It helps us identify sort of like two different aspects. One is that heat map of where things are going strong and where there's a lot of attention, or let's say on STEM or on SEL, and then also identify those gaps in our state where, while there's no training happening here or there aren't requests coming, and we can go in deeper into those programs and then work with funders to help meet the needs in those areas. You'll see in this example as well on the slide that there are some slightly different ways depending on their own funding source of how they access the different training options, but we've tried to make it as uniform as possible across the state. So those are my sort of examples. I'd be glad to talk more about the history of how it developed, or whatever direction questions people have.
Great. We have one question in the chat box. What is the external assessment tool that your state is using for the QRS?
So the quality assessment tool that we use is the Youth Program Quality Assessment Tool, the YPQI tool, developed by the Weichert Center. When we originally incorporated it within the QRIS, we developed cut scores so that a program had to have a certain aggregate score in order to get points within our QRIS. However, in the last couple of years, we moved away from the cut scores, and I'm very excited about this, and we moved more towards the fidelity of your implementation of the quality improvement process. And actually both agencies, Child Development Division and the Agency of Education, have moved in this direction. So it isn't about the score that a site gets at any one time. It's about, did you involve your staff in the whole process? Because if you're familiar with YPQI, it really is a staff development tool from the moment they open the tool and start to talk about quality with each other. So what we have now is, instead of an external assessor needing to rate a program at a certain cut score, we have programs that work with coaches, and the coach validates the fidelity of how they implemented the self-assessment process, how they worked with staff to develop the program improvement plans, what they chose as their goals, and what they're doing to move forward. So it's been a pretty exciting switch.
Great. Rebecca, I hope that answers your question. If there's any other questions for Holly, please put those in the chat box. Holly, anything you want to add about the process for building partnerships, key milestone or relationship, or how the introduction got made?
Yeah, I want to echo what Joellen said about having those common spaces where different partners are coming together. We've, at the network, always had a partner advisory council, which I think is where some of those initial conversations started about how do we define quality, what are the needs in the field, what do we need to do, which then leads to how can we pull those pieces together and fund them. There, I think, is also this need for, so it's almost like you get that joint goal by sitting at the table together, and then there's this lot of this work within that and under that to then figure out the strategy that's going to work for the particular agency and the funding source. So that's where, like, all those tweaks sort of come in, where it's like, okay, so we can only serve this type of program, or we need to do this with the dollars, or you have a certain priority, so how can we make sure that that need is met and still be true to having one quality assessment tool? So it's implemented maybe a little bit differently, but we still have one tool as an example. So there's that sort of that mediator role, that a network or another organization like that can play. And then I think the third is sort of the street cred of the network. We started out by holding a joint conference, a statewide annual conference, and having, the funders and the agencies there and seeing the number of people and seeing the feedback and seeing the energy from that, also I think helps sort of establish, like, this is exciting. We can do something, bigger than just any one funding source. We can actually serve this whole field. And the idea of being able to pilot something with a particular funding source and then go to another funder and say, hey, look at how this is looking. Here's the feedback from the field. How can we scale this up or build this out? Has really ping-ponged back and forth. Sometimes it's one agency that's leading on something, and then sometimes it's another one, and then now in a couple of projects we have private funders who now have picked up a lot of the SEL work and are pushing that forward. So that's been really interesting to see develop over time.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I'm sure that those type of conversations and convenings are a great way to engage the private funding sector too, and sort of get them excited about the work and the possibilities that are abound in the state, I would think.
Yeah, and that's easier to do if the state relationship is pretty steady and has a viewpoint that's more than 1 year. So if the relationship between the network and the state agency is long-term or multi-year, it allows you to keep that base, so then you can then spend your, the sort of the flicks and the creativity around, like, who else do we pull in, and how do we, tweak things in different ways. But it really does require that commitment that Joellen also talked about, that commitment to the network or to this partnership, whoever's hosting that partnership, over the long haul, and letting that be steady so that these other pieces can really build and come into play.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I see there's another question here from Rebecca. Do programs have their own coaches?
On site, or I guess.
Yeah, say a little more about sort of the coaching model.
So we've used coaching for a number of years. Sometimes the coach is someone that is an expert in a particular topic area, let's say restorative justice, that we bring in that works with groups over a period of time. For the SEL program, Sarah was doing a lot of coaching on site with the first pilots, actually working side by side with staff and coaching them through different practices on site. Over time, to make that model scalable and sustainable, we have brought in other providers and other coaches to work with sites. We've also switched to this community of practice model, where once a program gets over a certain level of competence in the area, then they're connected with each other. So 10 or so programs coming together on a monthly basis to really dive deep into practice and share and network with each other, and Sarah can support that in different ways, but she's not on site with every single staff member anymore. So there's sort of varying levels.
Great, thanks. I think that was helpful. All right, I think what we're going to do is move on. So thank you, Joellen. Thank you, Holly, for sharing that information. So I think, I hope what you all have heard here from the two of them is that there are a couple different ways that states are approaching these different ways of combining funds. It can be around creating a grant program that draws from multiple sources, transferring funds across agencies or programs, using those quality dollars or professional development dollars from different programs to, work with one comprehensive PD provider. Those are just a couple of examples. There's many different ways that combining funds can happen at the state level, but I'm hoping that this is, sparking some ideas for people about potential partnerships or ways to reach out to others. And so what we want to do now is have you reflect a little bit on what we've been discussing and what that might look like in your own state, whether you've had some success doing some partnerships and combining funds either at the state level or the program level, or if you've had some challenges in trying to do that work, and seeing if we can sort of help each other out with some ideas. So what we'd like you to do is to, pop into one of the two boxes that you see here on the screen. The top box is for ideas and successes. The bottom box is for any challenges. Jeannie will be sort of monitoring the chat in the top box, and I'll be monitoring the chat in the lower box, and we'll try to kind of reflect a little bit as we go along on some of the ideas that people have brought up. Do you want to mention back to the question that was up earlier about utilizing private funds and how the business sector might have been incorporated? So feel free to share any ideas or successes you've had about including private dollars, different state agency dollars, different community-based dollars, wherever those dollars are coming from and being combined. Share some ideas here in the chat box, and we'll have this section open for about 10 minutes. So, please feel free to take some time and share some thoughts here.
Lori, thank you for your comment. You say that it's validating from a young state network perspective to see that you're on the right track, but you acknowledge a lot more work needs to be done. Do you want to share where you're from and give us a little more sense of how you feel you're on the right track? That might be helpful. And you can type in either of the big boxes or right there in the chat box.
I see in the challenges box Melissa's point about getting programs to participate in the QRAS. I know there are some states that have where the Child Care Office and the 21st Century or the Department of Education offices have worked together to do a single quality system that covers multiple types of programs. If anyone has experience doing something like that, that would be great to hear about.
Okay, Lori is from Montana. Let's see here. Lori, you say you have a SEA and a child care agency at the table, which serves, it sounds like, as a steering council, but neither have invested ongoing in your budget. And you're entering into an MOU with 21C for the coming year to take on the statewide conference and launching the development of quality standards this fall with all parties at the table. Sounds great. I'm hopeful it will move the assessment and QRIS conversation into a fruitful direction. Great, thanks for sharing. Sounds like a nice step toward a couple of things that we heard from Joellen and Holly. Susan acknowledges that it obviously natural partnership is with 21C and CCDF, and that hosting a meeting between them, and you're in a good position to do that, Susan, because you are a TNTA provider that can convene those folks, is a great strategy.
Yeah, Susan, I love that strategy of having coffee. That's always a great way to start a new partnership, is over coffee. And I think, you know, as Jeannie and I have done versions of this presentation and had these conversations with people at the Child Care Institute this year and last year, you know, one of the things we've learned is that it really has, for a lot of folks, just started with, you know, I don't know who the agency person is or my counterpart in another agency, and it's just, I'm just going to pick up the phone and call and talk to that person and say, hey, we've got some, you know, overlapping priorities, and can we chat about what we're working on and see if there's any opportunity for partnership here or joint conversation. And so, you know, don't discount the cold call to someone who might be in a related agency or doing work that you know is related to the work you're doing, and see, and just have a conversation and see where there might be some overlap. Certainly looking at a state's overall priorities, I think, as in, you know, Joellen's example about the legislative piece, I think is really interesting. If you've got, you know, some of these legislative priorities or governor's priorities that are really aligned with what you're trying to do, you know, you might find some unexpected champions in some other, you know, other places around the state, and bringing them together for these conversations, I think, is always a great strategy. And certainly there are private funders that are eager to help encourage those kinds of convenings, because they can really see those partnerships pay off down the road. All right, so unless people have more thoughts that they'd like to share here in the box, I think what we can do is just see if there's anyone who has not been able to combine funds, and see if there were any thoughts that people wanted to share in the chat box there. If you haven't shared funds, sort of talk about why that maybe hasn't happened. Any other questions that people have for us for any of the presenters, you can go ahead and add those to the chat box. And if we feel like we're out of discussion energy, then we can certainly move on and wrap up.
So while people are thinking about that, I will share with folks the resources that we have here. Here's a link to the NCASE website. We mentioned the out-of-school time cost calculator, which you can access from this link here. There's also a resource coordinating CCDF and 21C that is on our website, and we have school-age data profiles that talk about each state and information about how they are working with school age in that state. So feel free to access any of those links. And here are the references to our presentation. Again, we have links to those references. And a lot of this information is mirrored in the Combining Resources Practice Brief that we mentioned earlier. You can download in from the pod on the left-hand lower side of your screen. And again, NCASE has a resource library with all kinds of practice briefs, webinars, video. So here's another link to access that if you haven't seen it. It is on the Child Care Technical Assistance site that Office of Child Care supports. And finally, we have our contact information. We thank Joellen and Holly for joining us again. They really put some life into what we have kind of produced in the resource brief, but really hearing from at the ground level is so wonderful, and hearing